Welcome everyone to the LAS Lock-In Podcast, episode number 2. It's me, KTL, with Stro, and we have our special guest, Fo. How you doing today, buddy?
I'm doing all right. Yeah, I'm glad we were able to get this rolling after the third try.
Yeah,
So
got
looking
it
Oh
forward to
rolling.
yeah,
it.
Definitely no cuts, definitely no problems. Stro, how you doing, brother?
doing good. Had got a lot of action to catch up on. It's been 2 weeks since our last check-in, so
Yeah,
should be a good one.
I think a lot's changed, at least somewhat. Like I feel like we had like our clear-cut contenders, like from the beginning, that we thought would be good. They've still been contenders, but some of the people who maybe rose up early are kind of starting to decline a little bit. So get to see what moves forward. But I want to break. Since we have Fo on the show, I want to talk to you, Fo. Obviously, like beginning of the season, you were planning on being a player on a team, and then now ended up coaching a team. How's that change of role been for you? How's all that you've been processing all of that?
Well, I think I was able to stumble into a pretty good gig with Warriors.
Mm,
Like you said, yeah, originally I was planning on joining the league as a support, and then lo and behold, I wind up peaking D3 and wasn't really able to do that.
yeah.
So then, after originally planning on potentially being on Warriors, I just kind of stuck around as the coach, quote unquote.
Yeah.
Um, Originally it was just like helping out with draft and stuff and giving them pointers. So I think I fit the vibe and enjoy hanging out with them. So it's been pretty chill so far.
Yeah, I know, Straw, you're doing something similar with TEG. Obviously, you also couldn't play either because, the solo queue thing, whatever. But
Yeah.
so how have you been transitioning? Because you've had the same issue. Like you both are the same, right? You both thought you'd be players. Now you're coaching your teams. How's it been going for you, Stro, with coaching this roster with this new iteration of TEG?
Yeah, I think I have a little bit, like, more obviously, I have more history with the TEG guys.
Hmm.
I've known, Architect, Grill, and obviously the new teammates that are obviously in, JMA's my IRL friend, Strangle in Fantasy, I won previously with on COG in, like, season 4, season 5, one of the 2.
Hmm.
So, obviously, it's a bunch of guys that I've been around, bunch of guys I know how they play. It's really weird to not be the one playing with them, but to be more or less, like, directing them on, like, "Okay, listen, like, these are issues." And it's definitely is different for sure, but
Yeah,
it's definitely a fun experience.
yeah, I can definitely imagine. And both of you have dealt with some roster turnover. Obviously, Stro, like with you guys going into the season, and then now Fo with you guys in the middle of the season. Talk to me like we'll deal with Fo first. What have been has that changed how you coach or how you manage your team, or is it still we just do the same things, handle everything the same way? Like, is there any change at all?
I think with the Warriors, it's kind of a special case since so many of the core players are IRL friends
Hmm.
and know each other and have been playing with each other for years. So there's been some variations in the team from the way that I understand it in the past few years, but um, I mean, it's a group of guys that are playing to have fun, you know? So I think swapping out 80 carries and moving Witty to a substitute and bringing you in to start, it hasn't really changed the vibe, I think,
Yeah.
overall, which, in the case of Warriors, I think that's like the strongest thing going for them is that every game they're playing to have fun. And I think at this level, especially when you're playing to have fun, I think that actually lets you play better than if every time you go into a game you're kind of hyper fixating on the things that you normally do wrong or the things that you can improve on, and you're really paying attention to the minute details. It really is more big picture.
Yeah.
So I think swapping out one player here or there, or playing with a sub because we've played with an e sub before during an official match. We've obviously swapped our 80 carry for the past week and are still going to for the next week. And overall in game, listening to the comms, listening to scrims, and just watching, it feels pretty much the exact same
Hmm.
with just a few slight in game tweaks. But with the way that everybody handles things and it's more go with the flow, you can step in and listen to the comms and you won't really be able to notice anything's different.
Yeah, definitely very free flowing comms for sure. It's very nice actually. I haven't really been on a lot of teams besides like last year's Tempest. That was more like we were really playing like to just enjoy playing with each other. That really was like a super serious atmosphere. So it's nice to be back in that kind of atmosphere. Stro, talk to me about with TEG going into the season. Obviously, even though you guys are going to have a roster together or not, putting one together, all of that, working everyone in to like play with one another. How's all that been incorporating for TG?
It was honestly a process. Like it definitely felt a lot longer than it actually was.
Hmm.
Is doing like getting Strangle, Grill, Architect, and Fan on was a pretty easy move. I mean, Fan, we brought Fan in for last playoffs. He's a huge vibe checker. I love that guy.
Yeah.
One of like, in my opinion, one of the best supports in the league. Um, but overall, like just having that there and then kind of going through these like mid tryouts, it's really weird, especially for like so they're used to obviously having me, and then we did a tryout. I was very vocal, held like a lot of like champions, but they were very like niche picks. Like you wouldn't do like this very like the same stuff. And then obviously we went to J Maz, who's my friend,
Yep.
and he's kind of he's learning the role. He's an AD carry main.
Hmm.
So just seeing all these kind of like small changes, like I have to like I've been tweaking our comps that we're doing, trying to find like, okay, what fits these players' styles, and it's pretty tough, but
How to get one
I
in?
fucking knew it was gonna happen.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, Zuko, get your fucking ass over here.
The power of editing.
Yeah, sure, editing is great. What I leave off on?
You're talking about champion changes for mid or for your comps.
Yeah, yeah. So like just seeing how the team plays differently with different champions. Obviously, it's a big change. Also, the two different mid laners that we had, uh, big com differences, but it's like a minor challenge that you gotta work through the kinks, and then I kind of shape how I coach to the current players.
Yeah, definitely makes sense. And then moving forward now to we're in season, we're in 4 weeks in now, which is still crazy. But 4 weeks in, ending towards the end of the regular season, looking towards playoffs. Obviously, Grand Tournament's looming after playoffs. Which teams do you guys keep eyes on the other divisions? Are you looking to see like this could be a threat? Could be someone that we could match up stylistically well against? Because we're seeing everyone being streamed, right? So you get to see a lot of different teams every week. So are there anyone for foes? And then we'll go to Stro for you guys have your eyes on people that you are like we could match up with them. This could be a team that we could see later on in the year, things like that.
Yeah, I'd say outside of the division, the one that I am most curious about is Moist.
Hmm.
I feel like having looked through their match results and kind of keeping tabs on them, especially their games against TEG, since I was able to actually see a little bit of the gameplay from those. I think they just play with a really unique style.
Hmm.
And I think at this level of play, when we're talking, gold through emerald, I think it's really hard to kind of theory craft how one team plays into another when they have such a unique style.
Hmm.
And it's something that you can't really prepare for unless you're able to find another team to maybe play
Mirror
some
it,
scrim
yeah,
blocks against that does similar things. But I mean, when you've got like Gray pulling out Asol bot lane, and I know they've played Pantheon top. I'm pretty sure they've played Warwick. Like
yeah,
a lot of teams in scrims that you play against aren't going to be pulling out these picks.
yeah,
So unless you're kind of keeping keeping eyes on what they're doing and maybe trying to practice some matchups or trying to at least feel out and kind of get a vibe for how they're going to do things. If you just load onto the Rift against these guys without any experience playing against them or any prep for it, I feel like you're probably going to get rolled. I mean,
yeah,
I don't know exactly how uh, teams are able to play on an even standing against them when they're taken out of their comfort zone from champ select.
yeah. I definitely would agree. They're definitely a team that I look at as obviously playing with Gray in the past, I know that he likes playing these crazy different champs and stuff like that. But the rest of their team in general, they feel like they have a really big champion pool for the most part. Some of them have some little shallower pools, but for some of their main roles, they have really deep pools. You don't really know what they're going to pull up at any time at all. So it feels like you can't just like get rid of like you said like a Warwick and then you're done. You don't have to worry about anything in the top lane. Well, this guy can play like Pantheon and a bunch of other things you don't normally see. So they're definitely a team that I keep my eyes on. Stro, what about you for champs in other divisions, maybe besides your own? Obviously, because you're in Moise's division. Different divisions that you've seen, and you're like, we'll be seeing you later, or I have my eye on you, or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you look at the top 2 from the 2 other divisions. I look at, Ragnarok ABB, and I look at, Warriors and Tempest. Those are the 2 of the 4 teams that I really look at, and it's like, yeah, these guys look pretty solid. We're definitely gonna see them in grand tourney somewhere.
Yeah.
Um, kind of just seeing, like, yeah, like, I know Warriors is more that loose team style, like, they'll lock the stuff that you don't see stereotypically, like, you'll see just the Yorick top, the Tom Kench top.
Yep.
Um, but, I mean, a lot of people play pretty standard. I mean, Tempest did a little bit of they do a little bit of testing here and there, and once again, I think it's really good for, the ELO bracket that we're in, is if you can if you can play that stuff, I mean, hey, nobody's used to playing it, like, I go into scrims and most people just play some absolute just crazy stuff.
Yeah.
Like, no, not crazy stuff, sorry. Like, those like Ornn every game, and then,
Yeah.
like, I
Super
go against
standard.
yeah, and then we go against, like, Colin, and he just goes, like, Yorick top, and you're just like, "Yeah, okay, bro, like, settle down."
Yeah. Exactly.
That's what makes drafting for Warriors fun, you know? Like,
Yeah.
I learned in Champ Select for an official match that my mid laner is a 100,000 mastery point Gangplank player and just proceeded to roll mid lane that game. And then afterwards, I'm like, why did you never tell me this?
Yep.
So, I mean, I feel like every player in this ELO bracket normally has at least a few champions that fall in that category that they can just pull out at a moment's notice. And if the enemy team isn't used to playing against it through probably solo queue, which is the place that they're more likely to play against it, then I mean, what do they really do? I mean, you can even have a favored matchup on, playing something standard. Like you could have like a control mage matchup in mid lane that's you think he is going to be, just resident sleeper mid lane. Let's hit each other with abilities and then try and get river prio. But then when the opponent's whipping out something that you haven't played against since season 7,
Yeah.
like you're not gonna be prepped for that, even if you're supposed to win it. You're going to be super rusty, and it's probably going to take you the first few levels to even figure out what you're doing again.
Yeah. I definitely think there's a few people like that in most of the tiers. I mean, I know casting Ragnarok, they love playing Corki, which is a champ that hasn't like it like fades in and out of relevance. I mean, it hasn't really been relevant now for about a year and a half, and like they will go to it whenever it's open. So there, and then same with like in the Legends division we talked about Kakalin, and then like YouTube. YouTube plays Kiana. You don't see Kiana unless you're at a really high level in the game, and he plays that well pretty proficiently. So it's like one of those champs that like if you're not pricing against it, it's probably banned every game against him because of that. Because people don't have the mastery to play against that style of champ, and it's kind of like a 1v9 champ. And then in the the champions division, I mean, we see that Elysium's mid laner loves playing artillery mages. Not something that's super common, especially like Xerath is now starting to become more prio because of his buffs, but champions like Vel'Koz were champs that no one would ever assume in the mid lane because it's a solo queue champ. You don't really see a lot of it, but he's been playing it every game it's open. So and it's a champ that's being banned against him. So it feels like in all of our divisions for tier one, there's a lot of unique strategies being put in place for most of them, which is actually really cool than just seeing like we pick Ornn, we pick aggro jungler, we pick Azir or like Victor or whatever. So it's really cool to see these different styles and how they're gonna mesh later on when we get to Grand Tournament. But yeah, it was. I'm always. I think for as the owner of the league and someone who plays in it, I guess the teams that I look at the most are Ragnarok because they play a pretty defensive style around their mid laner, and then same thing can be said for Elysium with their mid laner, and then Moist is like you said, the kind of the wild card. You don't really know what they're gonna play at any point in time. But moving forward now, let's talk about obviously we do voting at the end of the year or end of the playoffs for MVP and All Pro, all that stuff. Do you guys have any early MVPs for? Let's just say your. Let's just start with your own division first. Like, Fo, give me yours for your division. It could be someone from your own team. It doesn't matter. And Stro, same for you with your division. Like, I want to know for your own division, then we can see if you guys have any information on the other ones.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I would be pretty remiss if I wasn't picking someone from my own team,
Yeah.
seeing that we are kind of on top. I feel like someone that a lot of people might have been sleeping on going into this season is Kiru in the mid
Yeah,
lane.
I would agree.
I think he's been having a monster season so far. If you look at, I mean, especially our game against gods, both games he was going insane
Hmm.
on on both of his picks on the Silas, and then I forget exactly what he was playing game
Silas and
two, but
Victor. Yeah, he didn't
Silas and
die. He
Victor,
didn't
right?
die on Victor.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah,
And then yeah, and the stats was having a weird thing because he didn't die, so they
yeah,
didn't even register that he was playing the game. So
yeah.
I mean, I think that when people are prepping to play against us, I feel like a lot of attention is given to Kakalin because
Mm,
he's, pretty well known for, like we were saying earlier, the Yorick pick, the Tom Kench. I know he's played Dr. Mundo in the past. Like he has a lot of these solo queue adjacent, I would say, picks that are still like viable, very much so in a competitive setting. But I think that that's really freed up Kiru to kind of grow as a player, even in the past just 4 weeks,
yeah,
from week one to now. And I think that if he keeps this upward trajectory through playoffs into grand tournament, I think that he's going to be, um, at the very least, pushing first team all LES for mid,
mhm,
and at best, I think he has a genuine shot at making a run for MVP.
yeah. Definitely would agree. He's someone that I didn't know what to think of him last season because he played top and then he played mid because Colin was playing support last season for Warriors, so didn't really know a lot about what's going on for him and what my expectations were going into the season because he's not someone really seen LASQ a lot either, so it's not like someone I could get a lot of information on. But he's been killing it. Honestly, really well played. Been having a great season, like you said. He's been benefit of Colin absorbing a ton of bans, so it helps free up his champion pool. Um, but I would definitely agree for the Legend division. It does feel like Kiru is kind of like that front runner right now. I don't really know if there's anyone else that maybe has another step next to him. For sure. What about you guys for your champions division? Who do you think is the runaway right now?
Um, I mean, I think right now it's pretty tough because I think of um I really like Jessica Timpson from Moist. I think he's had a really very good season. Then I also think the same way about Elysium's mid as well. I think both of those mid laners have played really well. Obviously, I'm a little biased towards mids,
Yeah,
but Elysium right now it's hard for me to point out one specific person.
yeah. It
Um,
does feel like a well-oiled machine over there.
I think this weekend, obviously, I don't think we get to see Moist's actual full roster from what I believe. I believe there's a sub coming in,
There's sub
not
for their
like
support. Yes.
okay, got it. Um, so I think I would probably put this is make or break for Moist's jungle mid and Elysium's mid ADC. Those
Hmm.
are like my like top four. That's pretty close in my opinion. So this weekend, depending how the series goes, I think that kind of cements who kind of jumps in front of the other.
Yeah, I definitely would agree. I think someone who's been killing it in the stats department is Diamond's Dust, who's the moist jungler. He has like the highest KDA by like a lot in the that division right now, and actually all of tier one. He just has like the best KDA, kind of insane numbers. Brother Otter for the mid lane of Elysium has been doing really well at his unique champs, like we said, those artillery mage style. So I definitely think there are a lot of. I think it's much more contentious in Champions Division. I think in Champions and even in the Masters Division, it feels a lot more contentious, which we'll go over now. But I think for like Masters Division, I think right now it's been Ragnarok and the mid laner Wild Cinderace has kind of been the catalyst for that team being forward zero. I talked to Gani, who's the captain of Ragnarok before the season, and they didn't even know they were going to win a game going into the season, and now they've come in and just absolutely dumpstered everyone. They had one close series against Mint when they kind of just didn't really draft accordingly the first game, but the next two games they absolutely just blew the water out of Mint. And Cinders was a really big part of that. In all three games, he played super well. So I definitely think for Ragnarok, it definitely feels like Cinderace is that catalyst for that team. I think in Apple Bottom Boys, who's the second place team, I think Kaylor's been playing really well for them. So I definitely think Kaylor is somebody who could be considered for it. And then for Mint, I think it would probably be P. Diddy because he absorbs so many bans. We're talking 3 to 5 bans every single game, and he's still performing. So I definitely think he is someone, I mean, as their diamond exception, he is performing. So I definitely would say for the Masters division, that's kind of like where I'm at with. Moving past MVP now, is there any besides? I mean, obviously you could just say the undefeated teams, but for the tournament contenders, for legitimate tournament contenders? It's obviously early in the season. We still have to go through playoffs. A lot of teams can flip and flop, but do you feel like there's any early tournament contenders, foe, and then we'll go to Stro, on so far in the season?
Um, I feel like right now you have to look towards the undefeated teams. I mean, I
Hmm.
feel like it's kind of a cop out answer, but I feel like the gap between the undefeated teams and the teams immediately below them is pretty large right now, with just a few exceptions. I know that in Legends Division, with Warriors on top right now, I know Tempest can play up to that level
Yeah.
on a good day. I do think that Tempest kind of has just a few consistency issues right now that they need to overcome, come playoffs, come Grand Tournament. They are looking really good, and I know that they can step up, but I do still feel like there's a gap there. And like we were saying earlier, like you look at Champions Division, the gap between Moist and Elysium, who are yet to match up against each other, and say like a TEG, a Kamikaze, I feel like that's still a pretty big gap, not an insurmountable gap given
Yeah.
enough time. But I do think that the favorites right now, if I had to pick out of the undefeated teams, I would say Warriors or Moist right now.
Hmm.
Warriors, I think, have really shown the consistency that's required for a deep run through playoffs and Grand Tournament, given a good seeding. When it comes to best of ones in Grand Tournament, I can see consistency really being a key factor,
Yeah.
since if you mess up one game, you're not going to have another one. And I think after the first couple weeks of Warriors dropping game one in both of their series, I think they've kind of come back from that and found their stride.
Yeah.
And then Moist, like I was saying before, I think they have a really good shot at a really deep run just because of their play style and how unique it is. I think that teams are going to be hard pressed to adequately prep to play against them, and I think if Moist continues to capitalize on that, then I think they're going to be able to leverage that really well in playoffs once we start getting into those BO3 and later best of five series down the line.
Yeah. Definitely would agree. I definitely think, especially in like BO1 later, we're getting into group stage. The advantage you can have in a draft alone by having very deep champ pools and having weird picks can completely just win you a best of one alone. So I definitely would agree with that. I definitely think that Moist and Warriors have been the most consistent teams in the LAS so far. And then I would put Ragnarok and um, um, Elysium as like the next two most consistent teams. I definitely think Tempest is like the shakiest of all the teams. They are just either on or they're not.
Mm.
So, and it's also worth noting, like you said, for Tempest, they played their hardest weeks of their schedule. The first 2 weeks, they had a two one loss to Warriors, and then they won 2-1 against Event Horizon, who had a sub jungler. So also to take that into consideration, the event wasn't really playing with their full roster. Gonna have to see, and with a new mid laner, right? They had another mid laner than they had right now. So I'm really curious to see with those two teams in playoffs specifically how they match up. So pretty curious about that. Stro, are there any thoughts for you about early contenders?
Um, I guess I'll play the devil's advocate. I'll go away from these undefeated teams. I'll give some hopium,
Hopium
or
to B team,
copium.
to B team.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. I'm sorry, B team.
um, I think so. As long as I'll just go through like division. I think um ABB and Mint. I think those two teams, if they can grow in these like in the next week, 2 weeks to build up to the playoffs, they can set themselves up. They want to get like you want to get that 1 or 2 seed going into grand tournament.
Yeah.
It just makes life easier.
Yes.
You get better brackets most of the time. Um, I have faith that those two teams will kind of be the 2-3. Um, I think Tempest and Event Horizon.
Yeah.
I think those ones as well. I think Event Horizon has a little bit more to bump up. I have more faith in Tempest going into it. And then in my division, I mean, I think
It's you
what's
boys, the TEG
the two
boys.
yeah, I think the gap in our division is pretty like it's moist. I believe there's a gap between moist and Elysium.
Mhm.
I think we'll see this weekend. I could be wrong, and if I'm wrong, that's fine. We can freezing cold takes this. That's fine. Um, and then it's us, and then, I mean, we played Kamikaze, and I think we played really, really, really shit, but we still pulled out a win.
Hmm.
So, I think, yeah, with TEG's kind of like we're coping, we're hoping.
Yeah.
We're hoping we can get some miracle run, build up, find some style, hopefully a patch hits that really helps us out. Um, I mean, those teams that are, not undefeated, just you have time. There's also double E limb.
Yeah.
As long as you don't mess up in the first set and get bumped out. So just have faith, have hope.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I definitely would agree. And then the last topic, which is actually one that we were talking about today, Stro, earlier today. Uh, Tier 2 is joining Grand Tournament for the first time in 2 years. So Tier 2 is going to be contending with Tier 1 in the Grand Tournament. Do you see them having a chance, especially against, like, maybe not the top of the top echelon Tier 1 teams, but those 3 or 4 seeds? Do you think there's a realistic chance that they can compete with them?
I mean, I do think that they're like the 4 seeds, I definitely feel like a 1 seed from T2 should be able to. Um, I guess I'm gonna take just like a full shot here at English here. I think English, if they don't just stomp through T2 and actually give like a T1 team a shot, I think it's a pretty depressing turnout for them. Like,
Yeah.
and that's full holding them to expectations. Like that roster is, you know, up there
Yeah,
in
it's a
in
pretty good
in the
tier 2
names.
roster.
Yeah. Um, but I mean, it's possible. It's gonna take. I think it comes down to, yes, you might not be better individual players, but if you're better as a collective,
Yeah.
yeah, you could win. So it depends on how it progresses, how teams go. Like I think the well-oiled T2 teams, the ones that really gel well, they'll stand like they might not like roll people, but they could take a game off. They could, possibly run it to like, silver scrapes, give it like something.
Yeah.
I mean, I have faith. It's an uphill battle for them though, for sure.
Yeah, Fud, what about you on the tier 2 conversation?
Um, I mean, I'll give my take, but I have to preface my take by saying that I have watched exactly 0 Tier 2 games so far this year. Um, I do think that on paper, I think Anguish, like Stro said, is the Tier 2 team right now that probably has the best chance at giving like a 4 or maybe a 3 seed Tier 1 team a run for their money in a best of series. Um, but when we're talking Grand Tourney, you have to be able to make it through the group stage
Mhm.
too to even get to those best ofs.
Yep.
And I just don't really see a tier two team having the consistency against all of the seeds of uh, tier one division to be able to have a good enough record to make it to the best ofs.
Yeah.
I'm definitely willing to be proven wrong on this because I feel like if I am proven wrong, then it makes Grand Tournament way more exciting.
Yeah.
If we do have a tier two team or two that's putting up some numbers and is giving us the good results, I think it'll be really awesome. But I just don't know if any of our tier two squads are going to be able to eke it out.
Yeah, I've been thinking about it a lot, and I do think the best chance they have is in best of ones, especially for a team like Anguish, because they have a very unique style. They play a lot of weird champions in the jungle, similar to like how we were talking about with Moist. They have a very unique play style. It's very different. They play pretty standard in some lanes, but not all their lanes. So, and they have a couple players that we think should be on tier 1 rosters, but they're just deciding to play in the tier 2 rosters instead. And so I definitely think that they can contend in the best of ones. Now, when it comes to the best ofs, that's where it gets a little tricky for me. I don't think they probably light a candle to the better teams that are going to be making it out of the groups, especially when we're even considering the fact that they have to make top two in their group to get it to get into best ofs. That's a very hard ask because there's going to be a top seed, a number 2 seed from the tier ones, and a number 3 or 4. So that you're asking for a lot to go your way to, someone's going to have to implode in group stage for one of those teams to make it out. And that's why it's always really cool to think about it like the pro scene where it's like they're essentially a wild card region hoping that one of the major regions blows up mid tournament and they are able to just catapult in front of it because of it, right? So definitely gonna be interesting. I definitely think tier two as a whole is very competitive right now, which is very good compared to last season where like it was just two teams and everyone else was just kind of getting slammed. I think especially in the Warriors division, the division is very tight. It's not like a one team is better than everyone. There's a lot of teams winning a lot of games, and there's a lot of teams losing a lot of games. So it feels like there's just that clear cut like three or four teams that are very very good, and then we have to see obviously in the Conquerors division with Anguish if they're the only team that kind of if anyone can light a candle to them, which is also pretty scary as someone who went undefeated in the regular season last season. Complacency is a thing, and when you start smashing everyone in your division, you get complacent. You don't play the game. You don't play as a team. You lose one time when you're not supposed to, and it could completely derail your season. So really curious to see when they start playing stiffer competition how they respond, because it doesn't really feel like they've had that yet. But that's it for that. We're gonna go over the standings real quick. So going on over to the standings, we'll look at it real quick. For these are the current standings after 4 weeks in the tier one standings. Ragnarok, Apple Bottom Boys, Big Nitro, Mint, and Apes in Masters. I think the biggest surprise to me is Big Nitro. I thought that Mint would be a little bit better than them, maybe competing with Apple Bottom Boys. They have played with a sub for 2 weeks, which has really hurt them. But pretty surprising standings nonetheless. I think Legends is the most like cut and dry standings. It's Warriors, it's Tempest, it's Event Horizon. This is exactly what I thought the standings were going to look like. And then in Champions, we have Moist, Elysium, TEG, Kamikaze. Again, super expected results. Nothing really stands out here. And then in the tier two standings, we have Anguish and Big Magnum with Monolith of Steel dropping since a series since the last time we talked about this last in 2 weeks ago in the last episode. And then in the Warriors division, Tenebris has had a good split. Crusaders had a good split, and then Monolith again also dropped one. So a lot more erratic standings in tier two. Nothing's really been consistent besides the top team in Anguish. So gonna have to be curious to see what all happens moving forward. So now we're gonna get into this is just a really quick breakdown for you guys to see at home. So now we're gonna come back over to the power rankings here. So for these power rankings, we're doing them again. It's 2 weeks since last time we did it, Stro. We have pretty much the same teams in S tier, and then the A tier changed a little bit, and the B tier changed a little bit. Is there any thoughts? We'll go to you, Fo. Your first time seeing these. Are you surprised at all by these? Do you agree with them? What are your thoughts?
Um, I mean, I think S tier, like we've been saying the entire time, pretty cut and dry. I mean, it's the undefeated teams right now. I do think that at least one of these teams is going to slip down, likely into an A tier by the time that playoffs are over, just depending on how their playoff runs go. Um, A tier isn't particularly surprising to me either. Tempest, I think, like I said earlier, has the potential to push S tier, and I can definitely see them taking best of series off of some of our S tier teams.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that Tempest also has had some moments where they're playing more at the level of an espionage,
Yeah.
of a Mint. Mint, I think, having them in B tier based off of their results this season, I think is probably where I would land them too. I am still kind of holding out for a deep mint run once we get to playoffs, because I don't think that there's any chance of them falling low enough in the standings to not qualify. And I think that as long as Mint is in there, once they're back not playing with a sub anymore, and once they're really able to get some games on with their intended roster, I think we're going to see Mint start to rise up through the standings and start pushing some of our A tier teams. I can see Mint definitely pushing Event Horizon, Big Nitro, and on a good day, I can see them maybe pushing TEG a little bit. I wouldn't necessarily have them above TEG quite yet, but having played with a lot of the Mint guys in LASQ, I definitely think that they have a lot of potential, and I think we haven't really seen it yet.
Yeah. I definitely would agree. I think P Diddy's shown up every game. I think it's just waiting to see more from KMZ, more from their jungler, and more from Will Show the Ball. I think they've been pretty hit or miss in a lot of their games, so looking for more consistency from Mint alone, and then from some of these other B tier teams. I think Espionage started off really hot. They beat the two bottom teams in the division, and then they've had some pretty hard series getting blown out, in fact, by their next couple of matches. They play against the Warriors on Sunday for their final regular season game. Can see how they stack up against the Warriors. And then, like you said, I think in A tier the biggest surprise to me has been Big Nitro. I didn't know really know where to put them going into this, but I think A tier does them justice because they are ahead 2-1 in the standings. They have to play Mint later because the game got rescheduled. So that kind of waiting to see how that one goes and how Mint plays their final regular season match on Sunday. But Stro, do you have any thoughts here on these standings, and do you have any hope here for our wonderful C tier teams?
Um, the C tier is just if you like I said, if you just take a few games off, get some confidence ready for the playoff run that's coming up shortly.
Yeah,
Um, just because you guys had a bad regular season doesn't mean your postseason will be. You've had time, dial them in, I guess, see what the champ pools are, see if you got like some things that you can take advantage of. Um, I'm gonna reiterate. I'm also Mint is low. I definitely think they should be higher. I think they will be like by our next episode, in my opinion.
yeah,
Um, I think they're kind of a team that they've had a very slow slash underperforming regular season, but I don't think it's too big of a deal. Espionage, I know we talked about last episode. Like, yeah, they hit the ground running, but it was against the bottom two. They had a good showing, and their true test came up, and they dropped two. So, uh, TG, we climbed up. I I'm pretty iffy about it being A tier, but I'll take it for now. You know, we got some more to prove, I guess.
yeah,
Um, or actually, we don't have a game this week since Island Boys dropped out, so
yep.
we are officially the 3 seed, which is good. Puts us in a good position. Um, I mean, obviously, S tier stayed the same, 2 undefeated teams. Obviously, Moist versus Elysium, that's gonna break one of the undefeated streaks, but I still think that the S tier will stay the same going into playoffs unless there's a big roster explosion for anybody.
Yeah, I also think it's really cool that we have Moist versus Elysium, and we also have Ragnarok versus ABB. ABB is in the team that we really haven't focused on that much, and not really a lot of people in the league are paying a lot of attention to. But they're 3-1, and they have a chance to win the division if they beat Ragnarok. So I think it's a really cool series that we're able to cast both of them this week. Gonna have to see how competitive they are with Ragnarok. Ragnarok's had a lot of 2-1s, so really curious to see if that'll be another 2-1 series or if ABB can take it home potentially. But yeah, I would agree with everything else. I think Event Horizon, a team that is also progressing forward. They had a rough first 2 weeks, and they've been slowly getting better. Or I'm sorry, the middle 2 weeks, the second and the third week, they had like they lost to Tempest, lost to Warriors back to back weeks. Really tough scheduling, but then they bounced back really well last week against Espionage, in a series that I didn't know how they were going to play, and they completely dominated them. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see if Event Horizon can later on in playoffs take games off of Warriors or take games off Tempest. Like it'll be really interesting to see. They're like the team that I have my biggest eyes on as far as like a potential dark horse, we're gonna call them, in playoffs and going into Grand Tournament. But yeah, this is the tier one rankings. Now we're gonna move over to the tier two rankings. Tier two, it's changed a little bit. We had our two pillars of Monolith, of Steel and Slumber in S tier. With Anguish, they've fallen down. They've lost the best of one. The two undefeated teams that have beat them moved up. What are your thoughts, Stro, about tier two? Is there anything that's surprising to you at all?
Um, I know last episode we talked about the teams that are now currently in S tier. We did look at them as the strong teams. Um, I know we were pretty shocked by both Monolith teams doing really well.
Yeah.
Um, Now we look at their record and you see that Monolith goes deep in series pretty frequently.
Yes, they do.
And it's consistently stayed this way, so we expect to see like long series for them. Um, so they're not like dominating their series, I would say. That's why I think they dropped to A tier. everybody else kind of say the same C tier. Those are the same. I think B and C stayed exactly the same.
Yeah, they
I
haven't
think we just
changed.
made it. Yeah.
Yeah, it was
So
just the changes in the top, which is really
yeah, just
interesting. It's also gonna be curious to see because Monolith of Steel plays Anguish this Saturday or this Sunday. So it'll be really interesting to see how they play. And Slumber plays Tenebris. So we're talking about how our two undefeated teams could potentially be playing against, their best competition outside of the other undefeated teams. I mean, for Anguish, for sure, this is like their toughest competition they're gonna play is Monolith. So really interested to see how that series goes. If it's close, if we think the gap from Anguish and the rest of Tier Two is that much, this should just be a 2-0. But whether or not that actually happens or not is how why we have to play the games. So, Fo, do you have any? Obviously, you said you haven't had a chance to watch a lot of these, but I'm sure you've been like keeping up with the standings and everything like that. Are you surprised by any of this? I'll tell you, me personally, I thought Wildlife was gonna be a lot better. They've ended up not having the best of splits so far, but they have played against their two toughest opponents back-to-back weeks. But outside of that, Fo, do you have any comments on tier two at all?
I feel like when we're talking about this level of play, and that goes for tier two and tier one as well, it's kind of hard to not solely do results-based analysis
Yeah,
when we're looking at who is able to beat who is going to stay consistent over a long enough period of time. And I mean, if you just take a look at the standings and you see that Anguish and Tenebris haven't dropped even a single game in their best of series yet, that to me screams consistency, and that's
yep,
exactly what you need. But like we were saying earlier, when you look at both the Monolith teams, dropping some of these games in their best of series, even in the ones that they've managed
win, yeah,
to take the game threes in, you kind of just have to tighten that up if
yep,
we're if we're taking that through playoffs into best of ones later on, because those are the games that are going to hurt your best of one record. And I mean, even in this case, it can hurt your tiebreaker record depending on how things shake out. So I mean, it's really going to come down to in tier two, especially, is who is able to stay consistent the longest, because this is a long season.
yep,
We've still got another 3 months until the end of grand tournament,
yep,
right? So that's several patches, so many scrims, so many practices, so many stage games, right? So you have to be able to hold on to it for the long haul. And that goes for top tier one teams, top tier two teams. I mean, we could have the entire power rankings almost flipped on top of their heads, just depending on how teams are able to stay glued together over the next few weeks. I will say the last week in tier one and the last couple weeks in tier two are going to be really important, because whichever teams I think are able to carry the momentum into the first round of playoffs are going to be the ones that are going to be starting off on the right foot for those first later best of series. And if you can take that all the way through playoffs, you're looking good for grand tournament after that.
yeah. And I think the position and the fighting for the top spots is so important, especially that number one seed. Getting to decide who you play against is a big deal because if there's a
Mhm.
stacked division, so let's just talk about, we have the Warriors division. It feels a lot more contentious between the teams. If we're talking about choosing between a third spot or the fourth or fifth spot team, I know which one I'm deciding on. So
Mm.
it's gonna be that number one team is very important for that division specifically. So I think I would say my biggest dark horse in tier two is probably Star Search Galaxy. They have a really cool logo with the old Aurelion Sol logo, but it's also they're a pretty good team. They've won a lot of games. They've been in 2-1 series for every single series, whether they've won or lost. So that means even against the better teams, they're taking games off of them. So I think that's always really good to see for a team that got together. I think they told me like 2 weeks before the season even started. So they're continuing to get more reps in as the season goes on. So I definitely think Star Surge is a team that could eventually shoot up to A tier if they're able to start taking some games off of Monolith and Tenebros and Crusaders. So really interesting episode this week. Thank you for coming on and Stro as always. Make sure you guys are keeping on. We do this every 2 weeks, so the next time you'll see us, it will be after after regular season has ended for Tier One, getting ready for playoffs in Tier One, and then almost at the end of regular season for Tier Two, because Tier Two is a 7 week long season, much longer, more teams. in a smaller amount of divisions. So really curious to see, especially playoffs. We can start talking about playoffs in tier one and start talking about, playoff implications for tier two next time. So, but thank you guys all for watching, and we look forward to seeing you guys on the next one.